Hello, I'm Graham Jones and welcome to channel KT4 broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. You can join in by posting questions during the show. Just press the comments button on the screen. Don't forget to click the like or share buttons. If you're watching on YouTube, please click to subscribe to channel KT4. Trust me, it's free. I'm so pleased to welcome to my virtual studio Lionel Blackman, the Secretary of the Friends of Horton Cemetery. Welcome to my virtual studio, Lionel, and thank you so much for taking the time to be my guest here on channel KT4.
My pleasure, Graham. Thank you for inviting me.
It's absolutely always a delight. And actually, I have to say, I'm finding this to be one of the most interesting subjects that I've been covering, and I've been on air now for nearly a year. But the Friends of Horton Cemetery and everything about it is quite amazing because it's a registered charity. And what's unique about it is that the cemetery is an unconsecrated place, and it's the final resting place of patients who died in one of the cluster of 5 asylums built on the Horton estate. We'll talk about all that in a minute, but first, I'd like to show a short video which you've put together, which I hope will set the scene and install the importance of remembering those people who are buried there in their unmarked grave. Have a look at this. Quite amazing, isn't it? Just something, Lionel. We met on Sunday, actually at the cemetery, and to see the cemetery as it is today, and then to see those images of people, and it just shows the importance, doesn't it, of here. What everything I believe that the Friends of Horton Cemetery is all about is actually bringing to life those patients from the asylums who were buried there in unmarked graves. And I was wondering, if you could just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, for me, the symbolism of, as you put it, bringing back to life the patients that were buried there, and there are approximately 8,650 souls that were buried there between 1899 and 1955, is not only to do the right thing by the community that took guardianship over them and took responsibility for providing. And so dignity in death for those who have suffered mental illness, it's important symbolically for our society that is ever growing in better understanding of mental health as a condition to be regarded as in equal terms as a physical condition, is that it does represent an improvement to our attitudes to those who are today suffering from mental illness. So it's relevant not just to the past, it's very relevant to the present. Do you want me to tell you about how it all came about, that a concentration of so mmany bodies in 1 5-acre plot, and why it is relatively unusual?
I think so. I think what I just you need to correct me if I'm wrong here, Lionel, but I think it's the site of it. You know, we'll show an aerial picture in a minute, but it was designed for, am I right, 900 graves. However, there are just under 9,000 patients from the cluster of 5 asylums, and including some servicemen, are buried there. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, I mean, the crux of the development is that, yes, you're right. When it was first purchased, the plot of land, there was only 1 hospital in development. And then, of course, then there became 5 over the course of the next generation. And the cemetery was expanded. They assigned more of the land to it. But what's relatively unique nationally, and to help us understand why the cemetery is in the condition it is today, is that unlike many asylums up and down the country that had cemeteries within their own grounds, this cemetery served 5 different hospitals, albeit all owned by London County Council originally. And therefore the cemetery was separate from the boundaries of all those 5 hospitals. So when those 5 hospitals, one by one, were sold for development into housing, when the populations of the hospitals declined and then there was care in the community and so forth, it wasn't part and parcel of a sale to a developer who would make their profit out of building houses on the hospital grounds and then perhaps give back a small cemetery to the community as a garden of rest, for example. Just this cemetery, no boundary with any hospital. It was sold separately to a person or a company that had no stake in any of the other aspects of the hospital development. So that's why it's just remained undeveloped and not given back to the community. And so this is why we are making the stand that we are, and we're pursuing the acquisition of the cemetery so that we can restore dignity to it.
Yeah, I think it comes quite clear to me that, and there's the tabernacle, and let's just go back into the time when the cemetery was in full use, and we're talking about 5 burials a day, I believe. I think somebody said to me, and so you've quite clearly stated that you've got the 5 hospitals there, and each one of them are sending independently people to be buried, and the tabernacle becomes the holding area, and that's when they started allocating them graves and making the markers, which we'll see some images of a little later, the markers, so we could see and then register them. But because they're coming from, I'm confused here, because they're coming from different areas, we have on the registries where you've got a marker that says 1456, for example, and it'll say 1456A, 1456B, and then 3 months later, you'll get 1456A and 1456B. And that's all. That makes it much more difficult, doesn't it, to actually ascertain who is buried where and when they were buried and all the details.
Yes, so it's a problem, as well as, in a way, a benefit to the situation, that there is no detailed plan to indicate where any individual grave actually is. The fact that some of the markers are found on the ground is not in itself a sufficiently reliable indicator that that is where it originally was, because there could have been a lot of movement of articles in the cemetery since it was sold by the Health Service in 1983. Now, it starts to get a bit technical, but the fact is that by law, you can't disturb any human remain without the permission of the Ministry of Justice, and they require also the consent of relatives who would need to be traced. And therefore, if you can't determine where any one individual is, all 8,650 to disturb just one body, which basically means it's impossible to develop it without a huge cost of tracing, plus the cost of reburial, exhumation and reburial. So the lack of a plan is sad from the point of view, nobody knows where any one body actually is in that 5 acres. But because there has been no plan found, and researchers have been trying for years, and we've asked the owner if he's got one, and we've had no reply, does present a very substantial who fancied their chances of developing it anyway.
Yeah, I can see it. It is multi-strands of complexity here that's going on. But also, to add into the mix, the War Graves Commission get involved a little bit as well. And because there are at least 2 servicemen, and their graves should be tended by the War Graves Commission. Now, how does that work?
Okay, so the Commonwealth War Graves Commission have 2 memorials in the municipal cemetery in Ashley Road in Epsom in respect of a serviceman from the First World War and a serviceman from the Second World War, but their bodies are buried at the Horton Cemetery. So the Commonwealth Graves Commission's commission is to preserve memorials, not necessarily the actual graves, although they are recognised as being buried there by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and consequently there is a covenant on the land, which means that the Commonwealth Graves Commission must be consulted of any plan to disturb any remain. And again, any remain follows from the point I just made earlier, that nobody knows where any one body is, so therefore any one body could be the body of either of these 2 servicemen.
Yeah, I mean, it is unique. I have to say, Lionel, that because of my military background, I've actually been to an awful lot of war cemeteries, around Europe, and and I've been and paid my respects to servicemen that have fallen in pursuit of our freedoms, and I've seen how well the War Graves Commission does in maintaining those wonderful sites. And then here we have the first time ever I've seen a site that is completely derelict, run over, and everything else like that. And of course, the War Graves Commission has no idea within the space of that ground where those 2 servicemen are. It is probably the most unique situation for the War Graves. I want to just move on a little bit, Lionel, if I may, and I want to put up a picture. And I must admit, I Googled this. So I went on to Google Earth and I got a picture, an aerial picture. And if you could talk us through where the cemetery is within this picture, please, Lionel.
Cool.
There we go.
Yeah, so at the top, you see a roundabout, and that is north of the cemetery. And the cemetery is the copse or wood, as it appears to be, in the centre of the photograph, going right straight down the middle. The original entrance is on that north end on Horton Lane, fine gated entrance, and the tabernacle, a small chapel-looking building in which the coffins were brought for a short service before burial into graves, was situated also in that sort of north east corner. Presently, the cemetery is still surrounded by its original iron railing fence, and at the south point, just below the actual image is a footpath from the road, the B284 or Hook Road, and you can walk down that footpath and walk around the perimeter of the cemetery and get a sense of its size. 5 acres stretched out like that is really actually quite an immense size, and you will see also and observe the obvious neglect within it, but also the involvement of quite a lot of trees and biodiversity. Interesting, I may mention, given that aerial photograph of fulsome in full leaf trees, there is from 1996 a group tree preservation order. It's not upon individual trees, but it's protecting effectively all mature trees of a variety of species. So apart from that being another obstacle to any development, it does signal the importance of those trees. There were 2 beautiful lines of poplar trees originally laid out, as you can see from earlier photographs, and indeed one from 1988 on the website that we have, which is 5 years after it was purchased by the property developer. It's still looking in its original condition, so it's clearly been well maintained even after its closure in 1955. It was maintained by the Health Service in good condition right through to 1983, as evidenced by the fact you've got a photograph even after it was sold looking in good condition, but then just simply neglected, allowed to overgrow. So a lot of people think, looking at that photograph, think, well, you know, it's a lovely wood. And certainly if we acquire it, and we're quite determined that we will balance, you know, the need for dignity and a suitable memorial garden, but we will also work into plans that we have yet to detail, of course, preserving a great deal of natural habitat and nature.
Okay, thank you. Now, looking back to the roundabout in the north where the tabernacle was, there was, and you said there's a lovely line of poplar trees were going up there, but there was also a single pathway in the first part, the north part, and then it became 2 pathways, and of course the burials were either side of the path. Now, at the north end, I think you refer to that as the Victorian end, and the markers were traditional sort of iron crosses with a number on. And then as you go further south into the cemetery, then it becomes kind of like terracotta markers, and we'll show these in a little while. But I think that's about, so there is a, you know, as it's developed, it started in the north and moved further and further south. I think that's correct.
You may be correct. As I say, without more photographs, we're hoping that the coverage that our cause is getting might bring out from the population memories and photographs of the cemetery, so that we can have a better idea to answer those sort of questions. But again, without plans and photographs, we are a little uncertain of the scheme, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Now, just a couple of pictures here, Lionel, because we've actually started to cover the topics a little bit. But here is a wonderful picture of the memorial, and you can see the original wrought iron gates, fence that's behind it. Now, I believe that memorial is placed right on the roadside because the developers wouldn't give permission for it to be inside the fence. Is that right?
Yes, that is my understanding, that permission was not agreed by Mark Securities Limited, the owner, or its director, Michael Hayes. So permission was obtained from Surrey County Council, the Highway Authority, for the erection of that memorial following a public appeal by former Mayor, Councillor Alan Carson, now Alderman. And I should just correct you, that particular railing behind the memorial is new. I think that was installed together with the memorial. The original iron railings are all very sort of rusty and somewhat bent, and are shorter in height, around.
Okay, I understand that. Now, so on the right-hand side of this memorial, that's the memorial to the First and Second World War, to the dead of those particular conflicts. And then facing us, as it were, that's the memorial to the patients who are buried there. And then on the left, which we can't see, that is actually the time of when the memorial was placed and the alderman who supported doing that. I think that's about right, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. In addition, on the side to our right, as we look at that image, there's a reference to Polish servicemen that were also buried there in larger numbers than we are currently aware of UK and Commonwealth servicemen. And that, I'm going to take this opportunity to mention, is going to be a distinct sub-project with Polish language researchers to help us uncover exactly what's happened and what happened to many Polish servicemen who were in hospitals and then died and then were buried there.
Okay. And apparently this is now this is the old fence, isn't it?
Yes, that's an example of the old fence.
Yeah, and there is the sign, and apparently that is the only sign that anybody can see that says that actually this is Horton Cemetery.
Placed by he did the work on the memorial, but effectively a relatively recent addition to tell people what it was. But even sometimes that sign you can't see because of the overgrowth of trees and plants and fallen wood and so forth. But most people, they drive past it, not a clue that it's a cemetery.
I wouldn't have known. I must admit, I really wouldn't have known that. Now, I believe that the cemetery was sold by the Department of Health and Social Care. You mentioned that in 1983.
It was in 1983. Funnily enough, I've been in contact just in the last few days with Lord Speaker Fowler, because he was the Secretary of State for the Health Service at the time it was sold. I thought he might assist with some help or patronage, and indeed information, because we did some Freedom of Information Act requests of the Department of Health about the circumstances surrounding the sale, and they say they have no records. So all we have is really, frankly, a few rumours that it was sold for a song. Why they didn't first refer it to the burial authority for the area, which is Epsom Borough Council, remains a complete mystery.
Well, I've got to ask the question, Lionel. Why would government sell off a site such as this to a property developer? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Let us say it was in the heyday of the fire sale of public assets. Okay. Maybe there,
Okay, Lionel, could you tell me a little bit more, tell my viewers actually a little bit more about the Friends of Horton Cemetery, things like its structure, its mission statement, if it has one, about your volunteers?
Okay, sorry if I've spoke there. There's a slight delay and loss of signal on my end. The charity was only established in July last year, and so we've taken great strides in that short time. There's always been great people around, like Alan Carson, Sheila Berry, Kevin MacDonald, who've been thoroughly interested in maintaining awareness of the cemetery. But it needed organisation. We needed to have an entity, and with today's technology, the internet and email and so forth, it's amazing how quickly you can grow an organization with a good cause. So we've got great support. We've got and studying the lives of the people buried there that we're publishing on our website. We've got many of the VIPs of the town, if you like, who are patrons of the charity, so our aim is to get that cemetery back into the community and restore it.
So you're hoping to acquire this. You're hoping to so that the Friends can actually, because at the moment, I suppose if you were to go into the cemetery, you're now technically trespassing if you go onto the ground there. So, I mean, and I presume that's why there hasn't been a whole bunch of volunteers and some really very delicate excavation work so far has not taken place.
No, clearly the owner is not interested in using his ownership for the public good, because he's ignored all our correspondence since July that has been perfectly polite and courteous. He doesn't want to know. And therefore, as he owns the land, I mean, we can't have mass trespass. Clearly, he could get an injunction to stop that. And, you know, there'd be big issues about insurance as well. So we do have to acquire the title before we can begin a restoration project. I mean, the occasional individual that wants to look at the land, I can't encourage and advise civil trespass. Obviously, I'm a lawyer. But the reality is there's no incursion of privacy, because nobody lives there. Nobody lives near it. It's owned by a corporation. So there is no damages. I mean, technically it's a trespass, but there would be no award of compensation for somebody walking on it and doing no harm, you know.
Well, I see that there's, you know, having been there on Sunday, there are huge gaps within the old fence that's there. And I walked around the site. I was with you on Saturday, and I walked around the site on Sunday, and I didn't see anything that said private land, keep out, or anything like that. I could have just been a rambler going for a walk, you know, thinking this is an interesting place to have a look at, and just strolled in there. There's nothing to say you can't, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I mean, it's potentially hazardous, apart from tripping up on roots and fallen branches. There, of course, may well be some graves that are potentially in a collapsing state. So it is potentially hazardous, and, you know, no fence necessarily is going to stop some adventurous boys, you know, playing in such grounds, and the owner really needs to have insurers, because if you own land, you have to actually have insurance against your liability towards trespassers.
Of course. I mean, it's something. I mean, you have sort of explained the sheer cost of excavation work from the developer, so that would probably answer the question I was going to ask you as to, if you've got a property developer, why has he sat on this since 1983 and done nothing with it? And because to me, it looks like a prime chunk of land. And also, if he's not doing anything with it, why is he holding on to it?
Well, I wish I could answer those questions, Graham. Fortunately, with the owner not communicating and him being rather difficult to get hold of, I mean, you give it a try. Ask him yourself. But speculation has it that, well, he might have thought, without having studied all the legal restrictions on developing a cemetery, which, I mean, I have to keep it short because I could write a book about it, but in short, it's legally impossible to develop it. Apart from those practical considerations about the consent of relatives and the cost you have to show the plan of exhumation and reburial of 8,650 bodies, that's £10,000 a head. So, you know, but there are also actual direct legal restrictions, like the Disused Burial Grounds Act of 1884, I think, which basically prohibits building on a burial ground. Simple as that. So he may have bought it in ignorance of all these legal restrictions. He may have thought he had a sort of ransom strip if Surrey County Council needed a little strip of the land to build it, some of the new road networks with the development of the hospitals. Who knows?
Okay, all right. Look, I've got a couple of photographs here, and just it may help us a little bit. And I was wondering if you could explain the pictures for my viewers. That would be really good. Here's some markers, I think.
Now this shows evidence of a system that they had, numbering the graves, and so the numbers then are on the register and correspond to the name of the individual as known at the time of death, the date of their death, and the quarter and year of their birth. So what I think your viewers do need to know is that that was all on the grave markers, just a number, so no name. I can't explain why, other than presumably some form of economy. They maybe didn't have a workshop that could simply be engraving names on stones or markers, so they had pre-ordered a whole series of small iron crosses or terracotta crosses with numbers already on them, and then they allotted the next number available to that person, wrote it in the register. But the order in which they lie is still a mystery. We're working on it. We're working on whether we can determine and deduce some pattern, but it's proving really rather difficult to do so.
Yeah, I can see that, but I think I mentioned it earlier that when you got 1, 4, 5, 6, and you got A and B, and that's because you got more than one person in the same grave.
Yeah,
and somebody's is suggesting that the bodies could have even been stacked head to toe, toe to head, hence the A and the B. Again, this is all assumption, I would presume, at this particular point, and just shows how much work there is to do. But going back to this picture here again, I can see a number there of 1496, and I actually found that. It's not my photograph. It's Steve Johnson's photograph, but I found that, and that is solidly into the ground. Whereas the 716 there, that was just lying at the side of a tree. It could have been anywhere. But I also noticed there was a huge amount of there's a very, very large, in the south in particular, where these terracotta markers were found. There's some very large badger and fox sets there. And so obviously there's a lot of burrowing going on, and I think that will probably make the job even harder, because things like these terracotta markers and other objects would be disturbed. Another picture here, and this was a surprise. Marjorie Thornhill, who died aged 41, I think it says there, and I think that's the only gravestone that's been located so far, I believe.
Graham, you're right. Other gravestones that had been moved nearer to the entrance, either before or sometime after the closure of the cemetery to new burials in 1955, and then shortly after it was purchased by the property company in 1983, those notice being given to the government. And so we thought, when we saw that evidence, that all headstones had been removed. So it has come as a surprise to the researchers that you should have found this one remaining. So I think that will be a priority research project, that lady there. Yeah,
I think that that your genealogist, Steve, I think he's found the register number for Marjorie Thornhill. He did send that to me yesterday. So obviously,
because if I may, Graham, the interesting thing is, you see, where there are headstones, that indicates there were family at the time who had the money and interest to make that memorial, and therefore descendants of those people might be perhaps more interested in coming forward with and helping our project and making known their objections to any development, for example, because the majority of people buried there were buried there because either their families could not afford or were no longer interested in their relative who died, and therefore it was simply left to the community, the hospital, to organize the entire process.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. And here's another picture, and I think this is probably one of the best pictures that I've seen. I see the marker there of Epsom 1 mile, and that's the tabernacle, isn't it, at the onto the left, and that's the entrance to the cemetery when it was in its former glory. Wonderful.
Yes, yes, it is. I've forgotten what year that.
I can't.
And it looks in good condition.
Yeah, it was good, and it's a real shame again that the tabernacle isn't there anymore. Look, Lionel, I could talk to you for hours about Horton Cemetery. Sadly, we are out of time. Can I thank you for joining me today on Channel KT4? And please thank your trustees, your researchers, your volunteers for all the great work that they're doing in trying to preserve the cemetery, and in doing so, preserve the dignity of all the asylum patients who were buried there. So a very big thank you, Lionel, and I hope to find out more as how the project develops, and I'd love to get you back as things start to develop a little bit, if that's okay.
My pleasure, Graham. Thank you.
My pleasure as well. Thank you very much indeed, Lionel Blackman, for coming onto the show today. Very much appreciated. Now, each week, I'm giving a shout out to local businesses who've continued to support our local magazine throughout the pandemic. This week, it's the turn of Surrey Surveyors. Thank you guys for continuing to advertise in the Cuddingtonian. It's always helpful, and we really do need all the support that you can give us. So next week here on Channel KT4, I have the pleasure of welcoming a local representative of the Alzheimer's Society onto the show. So until then, this is Graham Jones on Channel KT4. Stay safe and have a great week.